All right, today I'm going to show you how to sew a zipper fly, but with a binding finish. And I'm going to be just using some canvas, some poplin, or maybe this is a quilting cotton, it's a spoonflower fabric. But I think that this is really nice if you're using a much lighter weight binding, because you don't really want this to get too thick or chunky. Like there's not really going to be any payoff if you fly and everything just is really heavy and chunky, right? So this is really nice though if you're doing a trouser and you wanted a nice finish inside, all fabric, nice and soft, maybe even just that pop of color, a really nice Instagram photo. All right, so you can see here that there is usually a notch right here at the top, and then there's usually a dot right here. And you need those, but if you don't have those, this dot right here corresponds to lining up to the notch here, and it's the seam line. So it should be your seam allowance, whatever that is on your pattern, away from this crotch curve here. And then the same thing there. So if you're having trouble locating one or the other, what you can do is fold this along the seam allowance here, and you want a nice parallel fabric there, and then that will be where your notch goes. So that's really important. I'm using a fly with a built-in fly facing. I like this style because it sets the zipper really deep into the fly, and then that way when you're wearing them, you don't, see any bit of the zipper, poking out from your fly when you sit, or if they're a little snug or whatever. So this really sets the zipper deep in there. All right. Usually you would be clipping this spot up to this dot, and we don't want to do that with the binding because we're going to clean finish this whole thing here. Really all we need this for is where we switch to our regular stitch when we're basting the center front. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to bind our center front, and this might be easier and harder depending upon the severeness of this curve and juncture there. So I recommend just doing the best you can here. So we're going to put this right side to the wrong side. I'm using a 1 3/8 inch wide piece of binding, which is 35 millimeters. And we're going to curve around here. Now when I get to this little point right here, I'm going to kind of cut across it instead of staying perfectly 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. And that's just going to soften that angle there. And I'll show you in just a second. So you can see I sort of cut across there rather than staying 1/4 of an inch away from the edge. I sort of softened that point there. All right, we'll do the same on the other side so that we can iron both at the same time. And I'm going to start from the bottom here. And again, when I get here, I'm going to note this is where the juncture is right here. And I'm going to go really close to it, in other words. Sort of like I'm trying to straighten this out a little bit. It's a little awkward. It might feel like you're not going to get a good finish, but just trust it until you get to the next step before you go to rip it out and try again. Okay, so now let's look it over. And the only thing now I'm going to look at is making sure that I have a nice even seam allowance. Like right here, I missed it a little bit, so we're just going to trim that a little bit better. Let's look at this one here. Probably the same thing. It's more that my binding got a little too shallow, but we'll just trim it anyway because we need the binding to wrap around. All right, so let's go to the iron. If you're confident in binding without doing the ironing step, you can. So we're going to press this toward the fly first. And we're going to pull it to the other side here. And now we're going to turn it under and press. And you want this fold to line up just past that original stitch line. Now when you get to this juncture here, it's weird, I know. It's really awkward. So we're just going to try and do our best here. You might get a little wrinkle, just like that. All right, it's looking a little bit like that. This one looks a little better than the other one, but we'll probably get a little bit of a tuck when we go to stitch it down. All right, now we're going to stitch it down. Now remember, a lot of this, what we're doing, is going to be covered up eventually. It's going to be covered up by the fly shield, and it's going to be just buried into the sewing of the zipper. So again, the fold goes just past the seam here, and we're going to stitch hopefully to the right of that stitch line. But like I said, this isn't going to show later on. So lift up your presser foot, stop needle down to get around this curve. It'll help manipulate it. There we go. And that's how it looks on this side. We're going to do one more binding step here. So take your fly shield, and we're going to put it right sides together, and we're going to sew across the bottom at the seam allowance that you have. Trim if necessary. We're going to give it a little press. And now we're going to bind this edge. Now for this one here, we want the binding to be clean finished right here. So what we're going to do is lay our binding, and we're going to let it extend about 1 inch past this edge right here, and we're going to wrap it around. It's not going to want to, like, depending on what your angle is here, sometimes I have a curved one, so it might do a little better on a curve because there's more of a right angle there. Because of the angle there, just fold it and try and line up the raw edges here in the seam. But you want it to be snug right where we're going to sew at about 1/4 inch there. All right, and now I'm going to sew this all the way up. I'm going to trim this little tail here. So here it's looking like this, and now we're going to pull this like this, just kind of give it a nice tug there. And now you can press this seam and press it to this side, turn it under and edge stitch. If you want to use iron, you can. Again, I get that fold just past the seam we just sewed, and try and get my needle to land to the right of the stitching. But like I said, this will be a little bit more visible than those are, but it's still going to be kind of buried. All right, so now when we get down to here, we're going to straighten this out a little bit so it's nice and flat. And now we're going to fold up this folded edge here. We're going to line that fold up with the raw edge of the fly there, just like a little triangle. You see that, like that? And now fold this edge down and then fold it over. Tuck in any of these little raw edges that want to sneak out. And you'll get a nice little envelope style fold there. All right, so now we have all of our binding complete, and if you know how to sew your fly, you can just keep going just like you normally would. All right, so now we're going to sew our center front here, right sides together, and we're gonna go from that notch, which I can barely see under my interfacing right here. I have a clip there too, to our dot. And we're gonna do a basting stitch here. And then when we get to the dot, we're gonna switch back to our regular seam length, back stitch, and continue sewing your seam. And there we go. All right, and we're gonna press this open, so go to the machine, and on this canvas, I'm definitely gonna press it. I definitely wanna make this as flat as possible because the canvas is pretty heavy. I'm not gonna press this open down here. Eventually, I will push this to the side. All right, here we go. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna top stitch the center front. So this is gonna be on the right or the wearer's left. So usually when you speak with right and left in clothing, it's always as if you're wearing it. So right now we're going to stitch down the center front here just to that dot there. This is a nice top stitch. So make sure you're doing something nice. I wouldn't go overboard on your back stitch here, just do a little bit because we're gonna pick this up and finish sewing it all the way down later. You can even just not back stitch and pull the threads to the back so that it looks seamless too. All right, so now on this wrong side, we're gonna take our zipper We're gonna put it face down, and we're gonna line up our tape to the seam here on this shield of the right leg here. I'm gonna put my tape a little past the seam because my tape's a little bit wide. All right, when you're stitching your zipper fly, I feel like the only time that it gets kind of dicey is when you go to do that last curve on the front of your pants. The thing to do to make sure that you won't have to worry about hitting the zipper at all is make sure that the bottom of your zipper is well away from the bottom of your fly. Because remember, we're going to stitch this curve here. And if you look at where this is in relation to the curve and the space you need to get around the curve and around the zipper with your presser foot, just lift this up. Get it well away. I like to put the tip of my tape touching the bottom here. I don't worry about that. I worry about the tape because that way I have this big chunk of space here going around. And there's the danger point, right? So we have nice spacing here. And like I said, I'm going to put my tape just a little past the fold there. All right, it's face down. Now just pick up the tape and the fly here, just separately. And now we're going to stitch it to the pant on the right side of the zipper. You might need a zipper foot. All right, so we're going to go down just like that. And now we're going to turn it so that it's right side up. And we're going to edge stitch right along the pant and the zipper right here. So I'm going to give it a nice little tug. If you want to iron it, you can. That might give you a nice crisp flat edge. The zipper might get really hot though, so be careful. Stitch here, just like that. All right, now I like to do this with the pant upside down. Now open it up, and now let the zipper just flop over to this side over here, just like that. I'm gonna get rid of some of these back stitch threads now. I'm going to give it a nice little tug, make sure this is all nice and flat, that I'm not over pulling it all. And you can see I barely have enough room to stitch my zipper to the fly here, and that's why I had over corrected it to the center. All right, so now pick these up now, and we're going to sew these, and we're going to do a couple rows of stitching just to give it some reinforcement. We did 2 rows on this side, so we'll do 2 rows on this side now. Get my zipper out of the way. Do a couple rows. Contrast thread always looks messier. All right, home stretch. All right, so basically now our zipper is installed, and we just need to do that decorative top stitch. So see here, this is the edge that we're going to be stitching around when we go around the curve. We have plenty of room for our presser foot to get by. If you need some reassurance, just place this wrong side up and just see if you get your presser foot alongside that stop there. Okay, so one thing I like to do is I use something called a Hera marker, which is like a sharp piece of plastic, and I draw my fly shape just like this. And then I can see a little dent on the right side. It's not very visible. The canvas isn't very camera friendly as far as the texture goes. But you can also use a template here. And I'm going to make this a little more pronounced from this side now, so you can see it. I can see where I'm going there, just like that. All right, now I know if I just tell myself, okay, we know for sure we can stitch all along here without hitting the zipper. We can get all the way around here without hitting zipper. It might look like it, but we're not going to, as long as we stay within that space there. All right, and we're going to stitch this from the right side. Now, if you're using a stretch denim or something like that, you might want to put a few pins here because you don't want this to, especially if your foot pressure is really high, it might push your fabric like this, especially those stretch denims and the really stretchy ones. So if you have that problem, you can see that might be happening. Release the pressure of your presser foot and also do some pins to kind of make sure that it doesn't do that. I'm holding pretty firmly and pulling it apart with my hands right now. All right, and so now we're getting down to the bottom here. We're gonna make sure both of our remainder crotch seam here is pressed towards that same leg there. And look, here's our zipper. We're right under it. Here's the base of it. So we're totally in the clear here. And now I'm gonna come around here, and then this is your opportunity to do any kind of decorative stitching that you want. So I'm gonna go right onto that stitch that we sewed at the very beginning and then continuing it down, pressing the seam allowances towards the left leg. And I kind of pull the pan apart as I go because the curve is so severe. Just like that. And if you want a second row here, or you had enough room to do a second row here, you can do that as well. All right, now our last step for sewing. So we're gonna take our fancy fly shield here. We're gonna lay it on top, lining it up to this loose edge right here. And if yours is long enough to cover this all up, I accidentally cut mine the other day, so it's not long enough, but I would normally go about right here, down here, but we'll put it up here just so that it's, well, we'll put it right here so it looks nicer. That way we would normally have it. All right, and then we're gonna pick these two up and sew them together. And you're gonna go as far as you can, and you're gonna have to stop when it starts curving away, just like that. If it's easier for you to do it from this side, you can do that as well if seeing it helps. But you'll start feeling it when you get down there, like, wait, where's my fabric? All right, our last step. We're gonna secure the fly shield here so that it stays to protect you from the zipper. And this is, you can choose where you like to do this. I always do a fake bar tack using my straight stitch here. And I would just do it anywhere along this curve. Usually, for me, there's always one part on this curve that I didn't get quite right. Anytime I stop sewing, I always get a little jog. So I usually use this as an opportunity to cover up that little blip. And we'll do it right here. And if you want another one along the rise, you can do that. You can put them wherever you like in a contrast color. All right, and now we just need to remove our basting stitch. And my little tip with this, once I get it going here, is I try and remove the whole thing in one continuous thread. So I just use my awl, I don't cut the thread, and I just go along like this. Now I don't want to pull too hard because what my hope is by the time I get down to the bottom here, I'll have a little tail that I can pull on down there, and I can get rid of that whole thread in there. So it looks nicer and it's not poking out along the basting's edge here. So let me just pull this all out. All right, I was almost successful. The canvas is a little too stiff, so I'm just gonna pull on this a little bit and hopefully the rest of it gets sunk in there. All right, there we go. Here is our zipper fly with our binding finish. Get rid of these little threads back here. If you had matching thread, it would look a lot nicer too along the rise here. And when you sew your back rise, just a little extra tip, when you sew your back rise, make sure you press your seams to the other leg, and then that way they'll be offset down here at the juncture of the inseam on the rise. All right, there you go. There is your bias bound fly.